Thank you. I made it a policy that now that I'm older and jet lag is really very difficult for me to work my way through, I always try to arrive a day or two in advance of teaching so I can try to shift my biological clock. I want you to know I arrived 2.5 hours ago. My biological clock says it's about 1:30 in the morning, and this is creating an intellectual fog. So it's a bit of a challenge. With apologies to people who've heard this story before, but I remember about 10 or 15 years ago, I do a city a day, right? I speak mostly on college campuses, and when you go to sleep at midnight and you get up at 4 a.m. to catch your next flight, you don't really shift your biological clock. I stay in the fog of Israel time, even though I'm in North America, and I don't know who I am or what I am or where I am. It's just a fog. So I remember I was at the beginning of my trip. I spoke at the University of Michigan, and I was in Detroit Airport, and it was like the second day of my trip or the third day of my trip. I can't remember. And I got up at 4, got to the airport by 5 to catch a 6 a.m. flight or whatever. And I staggered up to the Southwest Airlines ticket desk, and there's this bright, shiny, cheerful face of the ticket agent. And she says, "Good morning, sir. Where will you be going this morning?" And I looked at her and I said, "Denver." And she said, "Southwest doesn't fly to Denver, honey. Where else would you like to go?" And I said to her, "Where else do you go?" And she said, "Give me your passport." So I handed her my passport. She types in her computer. She says, "You listen to me very careful. You're going to Las Vegas today. You're going to Denver tomorrow. You take this, you walk down there, you're going to be okay." And she got me to my next city. So that's what it's like. So with apologies, that's a true story. And here we go. Let's see if I can pull this off. We're going to do a little bit of the mystical Hebrew alphabet. And the way to use the chart I gave you, by the way, you don't need any Hebrew for this class. It does help if you're a little bit familiar with some of the letters of the alphabet. If you're not, I wrote the names of the letters in the margin. We're only using a few letters this evening, and the Hebrew requirement is pretty much near zero. The way to use this chart is obviously the name of the letters in the margin. It's in 2 sets of 3 columns. The right-hand column of each set of 3 is the printer version of the letter. That's the way the letter will appear in a prayer book or in a textbook or something. That has no meaning whatsoever. We are skipping the right-hand column of each set. The middle column with the beautiful calligraphy, that is the informationally accurate letter. That's the one that shape actually has to appear correctly in a Torah scroll or in a mezuzah on a door. And therefore, we are using the middle column in tonight's class. The left-hand column is the mathematical value of every letter. It's called the gematria, and that we were taught by God to the Jewish people at Mount Sinai. So we are using the mathematical version in the left-hand column as well tonight. So we're focusing on the middle column, the left-hand column. And we have the only alphabet where we believe it's based on a God-given language. In Judaism, we believe that all languages and all alphabets are man-made, except for this one. When God gave Torah to the Jewish people at Mount Sinai, he designed Torah Hebrew as a code. And therefore, every letter has a philosophical meaning. The shape of the letter has to line up with its philosophical meaning, and the mathematical value of the letter has to line up with its philosophical meaning. And there's no other alphabet you can do that with. In other words, Aleph represents oneness, Beit represents two-ness, Gimel represents three-ness, and other alphabets are not codes, and therefore they don't have that much depth of information. For example, if I were to write the word cat on the board, a C doesn't mean anything, an A doesn't mean anything, and a T doesn't mean anything, and the sum total of those 3 letters teaches you nothing about the nature of a cat or what a cat philosophically represents. Torah Hebrew is the exact opposite. All these letters have meaning. They're like DNA, and therefore when God aligns letters in a certain pattern, that is a description of the thing itself. So in the Torah, when you see a Torah word that describes some particular object, not only does the word have a dictionary definition, but on a deeper level, the deeper meaning of that object is the sum total of the meanings of its letters in that particular order. And there's no other book you can do that with in history. You can't do that with the New Testament. You can't do that with the Quran. We believe those are man-made. But we believe that if you understand the Torah Hebrew system deeply, you'll see that the Torah is not a man-made set of mythological stories. It's actually a deeper coding system. And that's why it's possible to learn the Torah from Genesis through Deuteronomy as one long string of numbers. And I'll try to give you some examples of that this evening. So let's get started. We're just going to have time to try to work on the first letter of the Hebrew alphabet. That's the letter Aleph. Aleph, the word Aleph is spelled Aleph, Lamed, Fe, Aleph. It has a mathematical value of 1. And anytime you see oneness in Judaism, all onenesses always allude to God, right? Infinite oneness, infinite perfection of God. So there must be something godly about the letter Aleph, but you can't say it's a godly shape because you're not allowed to represent God with shapes. So there must be some sort of godly message in the letter Aleph, and we're going to be looking for hints to that this evening. As a matter of fact, there are hints to godliness in the letter Aleph. One of them is that this is the only letter of the Hebrew alphabet that's silent. Every other letter of the Hebrew alphabet has a physical sound associated with it. I don't know if any of you were taught modern Hebrew in a Jewish day school system, but when they teach you modern Hebrew, they teach you incorrectly that the ayin is a silent letter. That is not true. In the Torah, an ayin carries a guttural sound. The airline of Israel, which has an ayin in it, is not el-al, it's el-al, right? It's guttural. And therefore, ayin is not silent. Aleph is the only silent letter of the Hebrew alphabet, which means that Aleph carries the sound of whatever vowel you happen to stick below it. Now, why does that hint to godliness? Because just like God didn't give himself a physical expression out into the world, he doesn't assign a physical sound to the letter that represents his oneness. So that's why it's the only silent letter. Now, if you ask me to play the role of God's graphic artist and to design him a letter representing his oneness, I wouldn't have chosen this complex X-like pattern of a letter Aleph. It's not a terribly unified shape. If you want a unified shape for an Aleph, you'd use a vertical line or a horizontal line, maybe a circle is more unified, or a dot, but not this complex X-like pattern. But if you take a look at the kosher Aleph, meaning upper right-hand corner of your chart, but middle column Aleph, not the right-hand column Aleph, look at the Torah Aleph and you'll see an Aleph is not a letter in and of itself. An Aleph is really a combination of letters. So what combination of letters do you see in the letter Aleph? Right, excellent. There's an upper Yud. Now, for those of you not familiar with the Hebrew alphabet, Yud is the letter at the number 10 position in your chart. And we've got two of those. We've got an upper Yud and a lower Yud. And then we've got a slanted Vav. And for those of you not familiar with the Hebrew alphabet, that would be the number 6 letter of the alphabet. So we've got two of the letters at number 10 position, that's two Yuds, and one slanted Vav, that's the number 6 position on your chart. And that's basically the extent of the Hebrew you need to know this evening. Those two letters in combination are combined to form a letter representing God's oneness. So the question you have to ask is, why did God do that? Why didn't he just make a simple squiggle and call this an Aleph? Why did he borrow 3 letters in combination? So for that, we need to know the meaning of life according to Judaism in 90 seconds or less. Now, the meaning of life according to Judaism in 90 seconds or less is, if you were in the 1960s TV game show, I always date myself with this game show, but in the 1960s, there was a TV game show called Let's Make a Deal.
Yes, great show.
Starring Monty Hall. I think they had it on reruns.
Yeah.
Anyway, Monty Hall was a Jewish guy from Canada, and he was the host of the show. It was very clever. You brought something silly to the studio, and he would pick somebody in the audience and trade whatever silly thing they brought to the studio for what was behind one of the 3 curtains. Let's say you brought a bowling ball. So Monty Hall would say, okay, I'll trade you your bowling ball for what's behind one of the 3 curtains. The way the show worked is, behind one curtain there'd be a chicken, behind another curtain there'd be a chair, behind the 3rd curtain there'd be a brand new car. And you had to pick. And so for the meaning of life according to Judaism, behind the 3 curtains would be, behind curtain number 1 would be infinite knowledge. You know everything there is to know in the universe, which is an excellent choice. Behind curtain number 2 would be infinite pleasure. You live in infinite pleasure forever. Behind curtain number 3, God would be sitting on his throne. There'd be an empty chair nearby. You get to spend forever with God. Now, Judaism says there's nothing wrong with infinite knowledge because we are a knowledge-based religion. We love to know everything there is to know in the universe. Behind curtain number 2, infinite pleasure, sign me up, because Judaism says we are here to get pleasure. So that's also an excellent choice. But really, according to Judaism, you got to go for curtain number 3, because having God sitting on his throne and being able to connect back to that forever is, in effect, connection back to God is connecting back to the source of all the knowledge in curtain 1, connecting back to the source of all the pleasure in curtain 2, connecting back to the source of the curtains, the source of Monty Hall, the source of game shows, the source of everything. Judaism says, why go for a slice of pie when you can connect back to the pie factory? So the meaning of life, according to Judaism, is you're here to go for curtain number 3 and connect back to God forever. Now, for the purpose of this class, that leads to 2 very simple but very critical definitions you have to keep in mind for the next hour. The definition of good, according to Judaism, are going to be those decisions you make as a body-soul combination, because Judaism says, really, when the Talmud discusses the meaning of life, it doesn't use game shows. The Talmud was written down 2,000 years ago. I don't think there were any game shows. So the Talmud says like this: you are a soul. The essential you is called a neshama. It's a soul. The body you see in the mirror is not the essential you, because in high school biology, they taught you that the cells of your body are constantly replacing themselves. You don't have the same cells you had a few years ago, right? Skin cells are one rate, liver cells another rate, lung cells a third rate. So I remember from high school biology, I learned that the fastest replacing cell system in your body is your red blood cells, because they only last 90 days. So there's nobody in the room that has the same red blood cells they had, let's say, in December or whatever. So if you think about it, you can't say, I am my body, because the proteins and amino acids of the cells of your body are coming from the proteins and amino acids of the food you've been eating, right? This is the hamburgers and french fries you've been eating. It's not called you. So think about it. When you're born, you're this big. By the time you hit your teens, you're this big, but you're at least 4 or 5 bodies later. So you can't say, I am my body. Judaism says, no, your sense of self is spiritual. It's coming from your soul. Your body's unknown. It's good for 80, 90, 100 years. Who knows how long. So that body-soul combination is here to make decisions which connect you back to God. So the definition of good is any decision you make as a body-soul combination which connects you back to God. And the definition of evil is any decision you make as a body-soul combination which distances you from God. And notice the definition of good, connection, versus the definition of evil, distance, have nothing to do with what you like. That's critical. Good is that which connects you to God even if you hate it. Evil is that which distances you from God even if you love it. Okay, very important. When I teach this on college campuses, which I do a lot, I give a quiz at this point just to see if people are following the idea. The quiz is, let's say you're a French farmer, you're not Jewish, it's 1940, you're hiding Jews in your basement, and a Nazi bangs on the door and says, are you hiding any Jews in your basement? And you say, you Nazi, you're so evil, you're going to burn in hell for this, you should leave the German army, but I too am trying to work on my own ethics and morality, and I'm trying not to lie because it's not good for my soul, and therefore I have to tell you, I am hiding Jews in my basement, but you shouldn't take them. Now, according to the Torah, was that good or was that evil? Evil, because practicing not lying for those 60 seconds is going to cause a dozen people to get shot. Causing a dozen people to get shot is a distancer from God. It has nothing to do with what you like. Okay, we clear on the definition of good versus evil? Fine. So let's play make pretend. What if you could go back in time pre-day 1 of creation? What if you could go back in time pre-Big Bang, pre-time, matter, space, and energy, pre-universe, pre-reality, pre-everything? According to Judaism, if you could go back pre-everything, what would you find? Infinite oneness, infinite perfection of God, right? Because we believe God always exists. We believe time, matter, space, and energy are artificial things that God wills into existence, but he's not affected by them. So God always exists. As a matter of fact, Judaism says that God is the only thing that has real existence. Meaning, God is the only thing that doesn't require a cause for its existence. So God exists simply because God exists. Everything else needs a cause for its existence. So far, so good? So therefore, according to Judaism, God is the only thing that's real. Everything else is a result of what God wants. So the way we're going to abstract that a little bit is we're going to say that God is the only thing that is, everything else isn't. Meaning everything else isn't God, everything else is what God wants. So if God is and everything else isn't, if you and I live in a universe of isn't, it's only because the is, God wants the isn't to exist, because isn't has no existence. Only God has existence. Did you follow that? Okay, good. Now, That means that pre-day one, all there is the infinite oneness, infinite perfection of God. There isn't anything else because God's all there is. So if you could theoretically go back pre-day one of creation and all there is God, you think, well, what should I do today? Well, today hasn't been invented yet. I guess I'll connect back to God. There's nothing else here. It means that fulfilling the meaning of life according to Judaism and connection back to God is easiest pre-creation when there's nothing to distract you. So fulfilling the meaning of life according to Judaism would theoretically be easiest pre-creation because all there is God. The problem's like this. What happens when God decides he wants there to be a universe? Call it a Big Bang, call it day one, call it whatever, but as soon as God wills time, matter, space, and energy into existence, it's now going to be more difficult to connect back to him because there's more out there to distract you. So pre-day one, it was easy to connect back to God. On day one, whatever that means, it's going to be harder to connect back to God because there's more out there to distract me. Now, if you follow the logic, it means with each succeeding step of creation, with each succeeding day of creation, as the universe gains order, structure, and complexity, it's going to get more and more distracting and more difficult to connect back to God. So in theory, pre-day one, it would have been easy. On day one, God's going to develop whatever we call it, time, matter, space, and energy, and now it's going to be harder to connect back to God. On day two, as the universe gains order, structure, and complexity, it's harder to connect back to God than day one. On day three, it's harder than day two. On day four, it's harder than day three. So what I want you to do for tonight's class is I want you to re-look at the first 6 days of creation, not as if the Torah is a book of physics teaching you how to create a universe if you become God. But what the Torah is trying to do is describe layer upon layer upon layer of a mask of nature of physics, chemistry, and biology. With each succeeding day of creation, that mask gets more ordered, more structured, more complex, and makes it more and more difficult to connect back to God. Whatever these 6 days mean. In other words, you and I define a day by a rotation of the Earth relative to the sun. But there's no rotating Earth relative to the sun until day 4, which means these first 6 days could be billions of years. I don't know. But what's clear is the Torah is describing God creating a mask of nature of physics, chemistry, and biology, which is getting more and more ordered, more and more structured, more and more complex, and making it more and more difficult to connect back to him. Which means, listen carefully, the whole purpose of creation was connection back to God. That was the definition of good. But the act of creation over those first 6 days makes it more and more difficult for you and I to do that, which is another way of saying that the purpose of creation and the act of creation were opposites. And if you and I can figure out that the purpose of creation and the act of creation were opposites in under 3 minutes, why couldn't God figure that out? And the answer is he could. So why did he do that? You hear the question? So the answer goes back to when I was in the 5th grade. Now, what human beings understood before I was in the 5th grade, I don't know. But I figured it out in the 5th grade because what we used to do, and you all would never do this because you're actually nice people, but what we used to do is we used to take paper clips and bend them and then hook them to rubber bands and take aim at the head of the kid sitting next to us. And these paper clips stung like crazy. You have no idea. But the only time you could shoot that kid in the head with your paper clip or put it down is when the teacher was out of the room. Because when the teacher was standing in front of your desk, you never touch a rubber band or paper clips, so you don't want to get in trouble. That's exactly what God's doing. The only way to generate your free will capability of deciding whether or not you want to connect to God or whether or not you want to walk away is for God to pretend to be out of the room. And that's exactly what he's doing right now. And that's where your free will begins. Your free will begins where maybe God exists, maybe he doesn't. Maybe he's in the room right now, maybe he's not. That's where free will begins. Because think about it for a second. God's so infinitely overwhelmingly perfect and infinitely overwhelmingly pleasurable that if he were to take the mask of physics, chemistry, and biology he hides behind and decide to rip that mask apart for 30 seconds and appear in front of you and say, hey, guess what? I really do exist. So what are you going to do now? Be secular? You're going to be an atheist? No, I'll tell you what you're going to do. You know what you're going to do? You're going to try to grab on, and you're not going to be able to let go. And you're going to turn yourself into a robot or a zombie, and God doesn't want a planet full of robots, so he goes into hiding behind the first 6 days of creation, behind a mask just thick enough so maybe exists, maybe doesn't, maybe he's in the room right now, maybe he's not. Your job is to say, listen, God, I know you're up there. The mask of nature doesn't fool me. I want a relationship. That's your job. But free will requires you to be able to say, oh, come on, there's no such thing as God. Religion is a bunch of superstitions made up by primitive people to explain things that scare them. I don't believe in any of this nonsense. I'm an atheist. I'm out of here. No free will, no relationship. That's critical. I always tell my students at Neve, I teach at a women's college of Jewish studies. So I say to my students at Neve, if the day before you get married, I take your fiance, by using a combination of hypnosis and chemicals, I brainwash this guy into loving and adoring you. So much so that after the wedding, he follows you around the apartment all day like a lovesick puppy. He don't want to go to work in the morning because he can't stand the thought of being away from you for 8 hours. So for the first few hours of marriage, you'd love it. Then you'd throw him off a building because you don't have a husband. You got a robot. You can't have a relationship with a robot. What makes a relationship meaningful is his ability to walk away and his decision not to. God's so infinitely perfect, infinitely pleasurable. If he doesn't go into hiding, you'd have no free will. No free will, no relationship. You can't have a relationship without decision making, right? You follow this?
So Jeff Bezos and Elon Musk are onto something by going to Mars. No distractions. Start over.
I never really thought about it. Okay, so think about it for a second. Your free will begins where you're in doubt whether God exists, God doesn't, God's in the room right now, God's not in the room right now. Maybe science can explain everything. Maybe the universe is one big random accident. What a coincidence. Aren't we lucky? Maybe they're wrong. Think about it. If God's in the room right now, that's really serious. You guys should be taking more notes. But if he's not in the room, so hide your cell phones below your desk and check your text messages, because who's going to know? That's where free will begins, where maybe God exists, maybe doesn't. Once you understand that concept, that free will is so important to a relationship, you now understand one of these, like best kept secrets in Judaism. One of the things that you see the more you learn Torah is that if you look at the last 4,000 years of Jewish history, you see God does not like doing miracles, because everyone who's there, who sees a miracle that violates the laws of nature, pays a terrible price in losing their free will. Like in the last 4,000 years, how many times did God split the sea? The answer is once, because the millions of Jews standing in the seashore paid a terrible price for seeing that, because you can't walk away from something like that, an atheist. It's going to make you more religious, but God can't reward you for becoming more religious because you had nothing to do with that. He traumatized you into being more religious. So he's going to reward himself. So he's willing to make an exception, because those Jews who were forced to see it were being marched toward Mount Sinai and offered the Torah, and he had to get a yes. When he offered them the Torah, he had to get a yes. So he's willing to do things to that generation to prove his existence, but he won't do it for other generations. So therefore, you and I don't live in a world where miracles violate the laws of nature. Now, what God is willing to do historically is miracles within nature. That he does all the time, right? If he doesn't want you to go to a particular place, he gives your car a flat tire. That's not a miracle that violates the laws of nature. That's within nature. That he'll do 10,000 times a day, because that doesn't destroy your free will. But he doesn't like destroying your free will because you're not a decision maker any longer, and you don't have a relationship with God. Okay, is that clear? Any questions on this? Yeah.
You said, I think you were talking about the first days of creation, but in general, you said that as time goes on, connecting to God becomes harder. And I was thinking,
when the mass gets thicker, yeah.
Okay, I was thinking about how like technology gets more and more advanced, and it makes it harder to connect to
Absolutely.
God. Is that part of the same vein?
Thickening the mask,
so like
for sure.
Technology will increasingly make it more difficult for us to connect to.
Yeah, technology can make it harder to connect to God on lots of levels, but you're right. And therefore, your desire to learn Torah, with Project 613, gets a lot more reward in this generation than you would have gotten historically in earlier generations, where...
I mean, even electricity, right? Because before people read by candle, or they could just go to bed.
Any technology has the potential to turn people into atheists and say science will eventually explain everything. Yeah.
This might be a poorly worded question, but it's getting harder over time. If it gets too hard to see God, right, no one will be able to. If it's too easy, there's no reward in doing it. So there's got to be some perfect level where it's the right difficulty to know that God's there. If all of the early people who had it easier than we did, like made wrong decisions, right, like Adam made the wrong free will choice, then why is it still getting harder for us if we might be past the point of it being too difficult?
I don't know if it is too difficult, because the same technology that can guide you away from religion allows you to learn Torah 24 hours a day, 6 days a week, from anywhere in the world. You could be, you know, in Anchorage, Alaska, and listening to classes like this. Nowadays, that wasn't possible, you know, 50 years ago. So the everything has it's a two-sided coin. Everything has the potential to take you further away from God, but it has the ability to bring you closer in ways that resource-wise weren't available in previous generations. So I think Hashem knows what he's doing. The harder it gets, the more reward you get for doing things like this. And we could surely use more reward. But you're right. When times were simpler, it was, I think, an easier battle to fight. But I think God is fair. The same technology that can blind you is the same technology that can connect you. Okay, other questions? So that mask of nature, that first 6 days of creation, in Jewish mysticism, that's the deeper meaning of the Hebrew letter Vav. Because the Hebrew letter Vav is the sixth letter of the Hebrew alphabet, and it addresses the question, why did God create that mask of nature in the first 6 days of creation? Because it really makes no sense, because God's outside of time. So he doesn't need 6 days to thicken a mask of nature, so maybe exists, maybe doesn't, to give you free will. He could have done everything to thicken that mask in the first instant of the first day. So why is he spreading it out over 6 of these so-called days? And the answer is because any three-dimensional object, which is a part of the mask of nature which hides God, like this polyurethane eraser, any three-dimensional object, which is a part of the mask of nature which hides God, always has 6 expressions to it, right? It's got an up and a down, that's 2, and then an east, west, north, and south, that's another 4. So the idea of 6 represents that three-dimensional thickening of the mask of nature. So Vav, which is the 6th letter of the Hebrew alphabet, is the letter we use to represent physical completion. Physical completion. Sorry, I'm writing small here because the board's small. But 6 represents the physical completion of the mask to hide God, and therefore Vav is the letter that represents the mask of nature which hides God. Okay, that's Vav. Sorry?
Is there more, or was that it? I lost it.
Yeah, all we're saying is, if good is that which connects you to God and evil is that which distances you, then fulfilling the meaning of life, which is connection back to God, would have been theoretically easiest pre-day 1.
No, I'm talking about the Bob and
Yeah, so I'm saying, so when God hid himself behind 6 days of creation, 6 days of the mask of expanding physics, chemistry, and biology, so maybe exists, maybe doesn't, he's creating free will, but he didn't need 6 of these days to do that, because time doesn't mean anything by God. He's outside of it. So he could have done in the first instance, the first day. So why did he pick 6? So in Jewish mysticism, 6 represents the three-dimensional thickening in the mask, so maybe God exists, maybe he doesn't. That's the idea of three-dimensional objects having an up and down and an east, west, north.
No, I got that part, but where does the 2 yuds?
Oh, that we're getting to,
Okay,
step by
I
step.
thought I missed something.
No. That's going to be a little bit later. We're just building the letters, the meanings of the letters now. Okay, any questions on? Yeah.
Does it mean that there are importance between the letters? Like, because this letter represents a critical question, right? So
Are you asking me about the letter Vav?
Yeah. Is it more important than the others?
No. It's like saying DNA-wise, is there any one base pair sequence is more important than another? The answer is no. You need the whole string to create the information that life requires. So you need the whole alphabet, because each one's a different concept. Anyway, so Vav is equally important to other letters. Vav, by the way, has another definition. If you go into a hardware store in Israel and you say to the guy working in the hardware store, I need to buy a Vav, you literally walk out of the store with a hook. A Vav is a hook, right? So coats are held up on coat Vavs in Hebrew. In the building of the Mishkan, the tabernacle that we read about recently in the Torah, the curtains were held up with vavs because they're hooks, right? So a vav literally is a hook. Now that works out beautifully because in other languages, I think back to high school, right? In other languages, grammar was designed to make high school students' lives miserable. It was arbitrary, mean concepts created just to burden people. But when God designed Torah Hebrew, he designed Torah Hebrew grammar to teach philosophy. And we have the only language where grammar teaches philosophy. Other languages can't do that. So a vav literally is a hook. And in Hebrew, a vav is a V sound, the, right? And you use it as a prefix in front of a noun. And you say, ani, there's the vav, right? Ani, hakise. What did I just say? Me and the chair, right? So a vav as a prefix is the conjunction and, because and hooks things together, and a vav literally in Hebrew is a hook. Okay, so now, if God hired me as his graphic artist and asked me to design a letter representing that mask of nature which hides God, that first 6 days of creation, I wouldn't have used the straight line shape of a vav. It's not terribly physically complete. My letter of physical completion, the mask of nature which hides God, would be a lot more physically shaped, right? A lot more ink, a lot more movement, a lot more texture. This would be a letter that would be a physical work of art, right? Certain, je ne sais quoi. So that would be how I do the mask of nature letter, not the boring shape of a line of a vav. I was not consulted, so this is not the letter of physical completion, but you got the idea. But if God came to me and said, listen, I want to hire you as my graphic artist, but I want you to design for me a letter of non-physicality. What would a spiritual letter look like? In other words, God hired me to design a letter representing heaven as opposed to the physical world, or let's say your soul as opposed to your body, or your thoughts as opposed to your brain. What would a spiritual letter look like? I'd say, well, that's easy. Since ink is physical, I'd say, why use physical ink to represent a spiritual letter? And therefore, I would leave a blank spot. And I say, you see that blank spot right there? That's your letter of spirituality, because using physical ink for a spiritual letter doesn't make any sense. To which God would reply, nice try, but you can't write a Torah scroll where every time you want a spiritual letter, you leave a blank spot, because you won't know where words start and stop. So therefore, God says, listen, I want to hire you as my graphic artist. I want you to design a letter of spirituality, but you have to use ink. I say, fine. If I have to use ink, I'd make a dot, the least amount of physical ink possible, and that's exactly what God did. Because if you look at the alphabet, the least physical of all the letters of the Hebrew alphabet, and the only letter that floats in the air is the letter Yud. So Yud is that tiny drop of ink that floats. Every other letter of the Hebrew alphabet can sit on a line. So Yud is the Torah's letter of spirituality. Yud represents heaven as opposed to the physical world. Yud represents your soul as opposed to your body. Yud represents your thoughts as opposed to your brain. So whenever you think spirituality in the Torah, think the 10th letter of the Hebrew alphabet, that tiny drop of ink that floats. Now remember, I told you that in other languages, grammar is designed to punish high school students, but in the Torah, grammar teaches philosophy. So let's give you a little example. This example will only make sense if you have a little bit of Hebrew grammatical background. But even if you don't, there is a concept where you take any verb in the Torah, it doesn't matter which verb, but verbs in the Torah typically distill down to 3-letter roots. Like this is a famous verb. This is the verb daber, which means to speak. Okay? Now, if you take any verb root in the Torah grammatically, and you add a yud of spirituality as a prefix to that verb, so instead of saying daber, which means to speak, you say yidaber with the verb prefix, with a yud prefix. What do yuds do to verbs? Future tense, right? So yuds push the verbs into the future tense. So yidaber means he will speak, as opposed to daber being present tense. You follow? So why do yuds push verbs into the future tense? Because the future's not in the physical world. The future's only in the realm of thought. Yud is the letter of thought, so it slides verbs into the realm of thought. And that's why yuds push verbs into the future tense. Okay, that's an example of Hebrew grammar. teaching a philosophical idea. Now, once you see Yud as the letter of spirituality, you have to ask the question, why did God take the letter of spirituality and assign it a value of 10? There's lots of 10s in Judaism, but they're not spiritual. The 10 Commandments, there's a 10, but they're not spiritual, right? Don't murder, don't steal, don't commit adultery are not spiritual, they're practical. So there's lots of 10s in Judaism that aren't necessarily spiritual. So why take the letter of spirituality and assign a value of 10? I would have said, let's say 7 is spiritual, 7 is Shabbat. Shabbat is kind of spiritual. So if you go back to God's plan, Yud has a value of 10, and 10 is spiritual. But to understand that, you have to go back to pre-day 1 of creation. Let's go back to pre-day 1, where hang on for a second, where all there is the infinite oneness, infinite perfection of God, right? Let's go back pre-Big Bang, pre-everything, and all there is God. Now, if God is infinitely one, not sort of one, not kind of one, but let's say God is infinitely one. So by definition, infinite oneness means there's only oneness. So if there's only oneness, it doesn't allow for a universe with trillions and trillions and trillions of other things. So therefore, creation would theoretically violate God's infinite oneness, because infinite oneness means there's only oneness. So I'll give you an example. Let's say God's infinitely one. And let's say in the creation process, he decides to create an electron. Fine. But if there's an electron, don't tell me God's infinitely one, because there's an electron there, and the electron's not God. So why doesn't the electron violate God's infinite oneness? We wouldn't have a problem if we said God's sort of one or kind of one. But as soon as you claim God's infinitely one, then there's only infinite oneness. There can't be anything else. So where does the universe go unless it's going to violate God's infinite oneness? You hear the problem? Do you understand? I'm about to answer a problem that if you don't understand the problem, the answer is not going to make sense. So you follow the paradox here? God's infinitely one, so there can only be oneness. So you can't have a universe of trillions and trillions and trillions of things in it without violating that infinite oneness. So along comes the Arizal, who is a very famous Kabbalist, a mystic who lived in Sfat about 500 years ago. And he says, I'm going to give you a two-step metaphor to help your brain understand how God creates a universe with trillions of things in it and doesn't violate his infinite oneness. So this is only a metaphor. I'm going to do it for you. Then we're going to take a break. The metaphor is only 2 sentences long. But the Arizal says to understand how God created a universe without violating his oneness, you got to look at creation as a 2-step process where step 1 is negative and step 2 is positive. Now that doesn't flow scientifically, because the latest theory of science, based on the Big Bang, is the Big Bang was a 1-step process 13.8 billion years ago. The Arizal says no. From a Torah perspective, we have to look at it as a 2-step process where you're going from negative to positive. Each step is only a sentence long, but the first step is a negative step. The second step is a positive step. I'm going to do it for you. It's very simple metaphor. You listen carefully and see if you can spot where this metaphor is going to fail. Now, the reason why we use a metaphor that fails, even though it helps our brain try to understand how God created a universe without violating his oneness, the reason why we're going to use a metaphor that fails is because the built-in flaw is that a human brain is finite and locked within time. So in your brain, thought A leads to thought B leads to thought C, which allows you to conclude D. Now that process of understanding in a finite brain locked within time means that you're not going to understand God, who's infinite and outside of time. Our brains are not designed to understand God because they don't work the same way. You hear the problem? So therefore, the metaphor is going to try to help our brain come close to what God's doing, but ultimately we can't understand what God is or does because it's God. We're not God. You follow? So therefore, the metaphor is going to help our brain come close, but it's going to fail. See if you spot where the metaphor fails. Okay, you ready? Here we go. Step 1 of the metaphor. Now remember, step 1 is negative. In step 1 of the metaphor, God's so infinitely, overwhelmingly, intensely one, nothing else could possibly exist because God is too one-ish, T-O-O, one-ish, to allow for the possibility for something else to exist. His oneness is too intense, and therefore nothing else can exist. So what does he do? Metaphorically speaking, he's going to pull himself back and create a space. Now, this space is called a space where God is out of the way enough to allow for the possibility for something else to exist. Notice nothing exists. God's just making it possible by getting his infinite oneness out of the way enough so that such a thing could occur. That's step one. Why do we call it negative? Because God's not doing anything, God's removing, and removing is a negative process. In step two, God's going to will or zap into that space reality. That's where our universe unfolds. That is a positive step, and that's called the creative step. That is step two, that's positive. So there you go, 2 sentences. Step one was negative, where God pulls himself back enough to create a space where he's out of the way enough to allow for the possibility of something else to exist, even though nothing exists. And step two, he causes things to exist. That's the positive step. Negative to positive, 2 steps. I told you it wasn't really accurate. Did you spot where the metaphor failed?
Removing himself and adding himself right back into the space.
Yeah, that's accurate. How is that a problem?
We haven't netted any kind of progress.
No, yeah, mathematically that's true, but not in terms of creation. That's not. I don't think that's a problem.
Doesn't everything have God in it? Like if it's oneness, like hypothetically you could break a bunch of pieces off, but it could all add back up to one. So like because he's one.
Right, but infinite oneness describes an infinite unity that's not break-apartable. Yeah.
I'm not sure how it addresses the original question, because let's say,
The original question is, where did the metaphor fail?
well, I mean, I don't think the metaphor addresses the question the metaphor was supposed to
No,
address.
don't worry about addressing the question. Just see, the Arizal created a metaphor where he warns us it's going to fail. So I need you to understand where it fails so we can try to figure out what to do with the failure. Yeah.
The sheer act of not having a thing is a thing. So the negative space is also something.
It's a preparation step for something.
But even if it's a preparation, it's still something. The lack thereof something is something.
Yeah, I hear that, but I don't think that's where it fails. Yeah.
Everything has to add up to something.
No, it's not a mathematical. No. One more time, okay? In step one, God so intensely one, nothing else can exist. His oneness will override anything else's ability to exist. He's too intensely one. So he has to do something about that problem, or else there won't be anything else. So he pulls himself back and creates a space where he's out of the way enough to allow for the potential for something else to exist. Nothing exists. He's just making it possible for something to exist by getting out of the way. That is a negative step. The second step was positive, where he causes reality to exist. That was a positive step because now he's doing something. Where did the failure occur?
What is the space that's being contracted from? Like when God contracts,
He's just getting out of the way.
out, like what does out mean if there's no space outside of God? Like out of what? Like it's not like God occupies a box and then leaves a corner blank. There's no box
So the problem with step one is what?
Hashem is in everything. Hashem is everything.
So the problem with step one is what?
There's no stepping out of it. Hashem
Correct.
can't
Thank you.
put himself
There you go. That's good. That's what I was waiting for. That's correct. Right. If God is infinitely one, you don't have to talk location. But if you do talk location, you must talk equally, infinitely everywhere. And therefore, if you're God, you can't get out of the way. There's nowhere to go. So step one fails in its first sentence. God can't create a space where he's out of the way because God can't get out of the way because God's equally everywhere. You hear the problem? So if you think about that too much, in step one, you'll get a headache. So along came a later Kabbalist about 200 years later and said, does it give you a headache thinking that God pulled himself back and created a space where he got out of the way enough to allow for something else to exist? And you know God can't get out of the way because God's everywhere. Therefore, there's no place to go. So this later Kabbalist, Rav Chaim from Volozhin, he says, if that gives you a headache, the Arizal is correct. The wording may be a little problematic. He says, I'm going to reword that first statement in a way where you'll get less headaches. But he says, trust me, I'm saying the exact same thing. It's just my version is easier on your brain. Because the first statement of the Arizal was correct. It just makes no sense. So he says like this, ready? He says, in step one, instead of saying God pulled himself back enough to create a space where he was out of the way enough to allow for something else to exist, which makes no sense, he says, why did you simply say in step one, God hid himself enough to allow for the possibility for something else to exist? And therefore, you don't have to think of God going anywhere. Step 1 is negative because God goes into hiding. Step 2 is positive because he wills reality into existence. And that's the 2 steps of creation, negative to positive. You follow? Any questions on that?
How does God hide himself?
That's the first 6 days of creation, layer upon layer upon layer of a mask. We good? Okay, I think this is a natural stopping point, and we'll explain.
And on that natural stopping point, you know you have a great-great-great-great-grandson of Rabbi.
Oh, amazing. That's perfect.
Okay, let's take a break.
We'll explain more of this 2-step metaphor when we come back. So let's see what we can do with that insight that the Arizal has, that unlike the science view of, the theory that 13.8 billion years ago there was a Big Bang, which sounds like some sort of one-step process. The Torah view of creation, at least from a mystical perspective, is a 2-step process where step 1 was negative, God goes into hiding. Step 2 is positive, he wills reality into existence. So once you understand that Torah view of a 2-step process, negative to positive, certain things in Judaism that don't make sense will start making sense. For example, if you look historically at ancient civilizations, let's say you were all getting together 3,000 years ago to form your own civilization, somewhere in the Middle East, and for business and economic reasons, you all have to agree on the passage of time, because you can't do business unless everyone agrees when does Monday officially end and when does Tuesday officially begin. When do we end Tuesday and begin Wednesday? You need that for economic reasons. Everyone has to be on the same page. So historically, the easiest way to end one day and start another day was to get up early in the morning, 5 in the morning or something, look out your eastern window, and when the eastern sky went from black to blue, as the sun started coming up, you could say, okay, Monday's over, let's start Tuesday. So sunrise was an ancient method of switching days. That makes sense. Believe it or not, ancient civilizations could also use midnight. Now, they didn't have clocks. I mean, clocks were not going to be invented for thousands of years, but you could determine midnight in ancient times, and you didn't need to see the moon and you didn't need to see stars. How did you know when it was midnight in ancient times without, let's say, the moon or the stars? And you don't have to say it was darker at midnight. It's not true. Yeah.
Well, now cut sort of wide, so you think it's like the halfway between sundown and sun up.
Right. So the ancient method of determining midnight was actually a simple method based on noon, because noon, the definition of noon is when the sun is right at the highest point of its arc, right? So all you have to do is divide your day into an even number of divisions. We use 24, but it doesn't matter. You can use any even number, because the definition of midnight is always the mathematical opposite of noon. So if you got noon, you got midnight. So ancient civilizations actually could use midnight to go from Monday to Tuesday. Modern civilizations do it, but ancient civilizations could also. The only one that made no sense was Judaism. Because, I mean, if you think about it, we have the most bizarre system. We went from Monday to Tuesday when the sun went down. Now, you may not have thought about it, but let's pretend you're an Orthodox Jewish lawyer working for a non-Jewish law firm, and it's Monday, December 20th. And for those of you not from New York, at the end of December, the sun's going down about 5 minutes after 4 in the afternoon. So let's say on that Monday, your boss calls you into his office at 1 o'clock in the afternoon and says, you know that report I asked you for? I want it on my desk today by 5. And you say, oh, 5? Oh, you want it tomorrow? And he says, no, that's not what I said. I said today by 5. You say, well, let's be honest. The sun's going down at 5 minutes after 4. That means it's 6 minutes after 4, it's Tuesday. You want it on Tuesday. He says, you're fired. But from an Orthodox Jewish perspective, you're 100% right. Monday's over at 5 minutes after 4. 6 minutes after 4, it's Tuesday. So how, where do we get that from? The answer is the metaphor. Because if step 1 of creation, metaphorically speaking, is God going into hiding, that's a negative step. So in the Torah's creation story, hiding is always darkness. And if step 2 is willing reality into existence, that's called let there be light. So our days are actually going negative to positive, which is why every day of creation says there was evening, there was morning one day. There was evening, there was morning a second day. That's negative to positive. It's hiding to willing reality into existence. And based on that, you see why our days start with the negative hiding and progress into the positive light. So that's why days start at the sundown. And now you know why Shabbat starts at sundown Friday instead of midnight or dawn. We're following the metaphor of the creation process, negative to positive. You follow? That's one thing that the metaphor explains. The other thing the metaphor explains is where Judaism and science disagree. Let's take this plastic chair. If I were to take a secular scientist who does not believe in God, and I say, Mr. Secular Scientist who does not believe in God, where do the carbons, hydrogens, oxygens, and nitrogens of the plastic come from? So he'll say, according to scientific theory, that's actually relatively straightforward because atoms come from early star formation. Early star formation comes from early galaxy formation. Early galaxy formation comes from a Big Bang 13.8 billion years ago. So you can trace the atoms in the chair all the way back to the Big Bang. So if I said to Mr. Secular Scientist who does not believe in God, I'm just curious, where did that Big Bang come from? So now science has a problem they don't like to talk about, but it's very important for you to understand. Science is based primarily on extrapolation and interpretation of things you can measure. And guess what? Pre-Big Bang is pre-measurements. So when you say, where did the Big Bang come from? Science has a problem because you can't measure before there are measurements. In other words, from the Big Bang on, so we can create measurements, we can create equations, we can learn a lot through physics. So science has a lot to say after the Big Bang. But pre-Big Bang is pre-physics. So how do you know what systems were at work before there were systems at work? So when you say, where did the Big Bang come from? What he can't tell you is, well, I'll say this, it wasn't God. Because all you have to do is say, excuse me, how do you measure that? How do you know whether it was God or not? Where can science get that information from? So the answer is they can't. So don't let a scientist tell you the Big Bang had nothing to do with God. They can't figure that out. That's not a scientific measurement. So if he's honest and you say, where did the Big Bang come from? He has to say, listen, we're not sure. We're working on theories. Maybe it was God, maybe it wasn't. We don't know. That's an honest answer. But don't let a scientist tell you it wasn't God. There's no basis in science to figure that out. Okay? Now, where do we disagree? Because he looks at the carbons, hydrogens, oxygens, and nitrogens of the plastic of the chair, and he says the chair exists. And Judaism says, oh no, there's only one thing that has real existence, and that is God. So God is the only thing that exists. God has to cause everything else to exist. Meaning, if you could go to a store and buy spiritual glasses, obviously I'm making this up, but let's say you could buy spiritual glasses, you put them on, and you can see spiritual things, right? You look at people and see their souls. So if you could put on spiritual glasses and look at the chair, you say, you know what? I thought the atoms, molecules, and electrons of the chair had an existence in and of themselves. But now that I put on my spiritual glasses and I take another look, I see that every atom, molecule, and electron, and every subatomic particle is constantly being beamed into existence by an infinitely one, infinitely perfect source up there. But without the glasses, you can't see the beams. See, the chair has to be coming from something. You know what it's like? You know when you go to the movies and you're sitting in the theater and you see an actor walk across the screen, and you say to yourself, oh, come on, that's ridiculous. There's nobody walking across the screen. The screen's a white piece of material. And in the back of the theater, there's a projector. And in the projector, what they did in the studio is they filmed the actor where in each frame of the film, his leg is in a slightly different position. And they put each frame of the film in a projector and fired those frames at the screen at a rate of 24 frames a second. Now, 24 frames a second is so fast, your retina can't refresh its image at a rate of 24 frames a second, and therefore your eye is fooled into seeing a fluid motion. But if our eyes were faster, we'd see there's no fluid motion on the screen. It's really hundreds of single images fired up there too quickly for your eye to follow. According to Judaism, that's reality. The reason why you and I see a constant image of each other is we're being created so fast, so many times per instant, we look like we're constantly here. And that's true for you, it's true for me, it's true for the chair, it's true for the rest of the universe. According to science, creation was a Big Bang 13.8 billion years ago. According to Judaism, creation is every single instant. Because any instant, God doesn't hide himself enough to allow for the possibility for something else to exist. Nothing exists. And any instant, God's not the source of his existence. Nothing exists. And therefore, according to Judaism, creation is a constant process. According to science, it was a one-step process 13.8 billion years ago. Let me just graph it for you, because I think it's easier to see visually. let's pretend God is up, even though God is everywhere. Heaven, according to the Torah, has lots of levels in it. Each one subdivided. So you get thousands of levels of the spiritual world. The word for heaven is not in the singular in the Torah, it's really in the plural. So it's really heavens. So let's pretend this is the bottom of the spiritual realm. And there from here down is our universe with its billions of galaxies. Each galaxy has billions of stars. And here's a human being down here on the planet Earth. And if you are scientifically minded, no, it is not to scale. Okay? Fine. So let's pretend God's will looks like red ink or red light. I'm going to use watts of light as a metaphor. So up here, God's so infinitely, intensely one. His will is a billion, trillion, gazillion watts of infinite oneness, infinite perfection. It's so infinitely, intensely one, nothing else could possibly exist. It's too one-ish for anything else to exist. So what does God do? When he wills the levels of the spiritual realm into existence, because remember, heaven has no existence. Only God has existence. So he has to will the levels of heaven into existence constantly. When he causes all these levels of the spiritual realm to exist constantly, he causes them to function like filters. So pretend there's thousands of levels of sunglasses up there. So when he sends his will down through the spiritual realm, he filters it down from 100 billion, trillion, gazillion watts of infinite oneness, infinite perfection, down to 100 billion watts of infinite oneness, infinite perfection, down to a billion watts, down to 100 million watts, down to a million watts, down to 100,000 watts of infinite oneness, infinite perfection, down to 1,000 watts. By the time God's will crosses the lowest level of the spiritual realm, he's filtered it down to, let's make up a number. Let's call it 0.0000001 watts of infinite oneness, infinite perfection. And it looks like that chair. And that's why, even though every atom, molecule, and electron and every subatomic particle is constantly being beamed into existence by an infinitely one, infinitely perfect source, you'd never know it. Because you look at the chair and you don't see its godly origin, right? The chair doesn't glow, the chair doesn't sparkle. The chair looks like Walmart. In a world of Walmart, maybe God exists, maybe he doesn't. See, the chair has two functions according to Judaism. One is to sit on, and the other is to be an ugly part of the mask of nature, which hides God. Because you can imagine if God didn't filter his oneness down to the point where you couldn't spot it, and you could see that the chair was constantly coming from a godly source. If the chair glowed and sparkled and seemed godly, you say, oh my gosh, somebody throw an asbestos blanket on the chair. It's so spiritually godly, it's so spiritually powerful, it's making me too religious. Get it out of the room. God says, I don't want chairs to make you religious. I want you to decide for yourself whether you want to be religious. And therefore, he wills things into existence, which are so filtered down, you don't see the godliness in everything, even though it's constantly coming from God's oneness. Yeah.
So, I mean, if the materials are wholly from God, but it was a physical person who put them together into what looks like a chair.
Right, that's the difference between God and human being. People don't make chairs. People put things together to create a chair. God makes reality from nothing. So we're taking what God creates and we're just assembling it. Because when we walk away, the chair exists. If God were to walk away, nothing exists. That's the difference. Okay, so now, once you have God's oneness being filtered down to a place where you can't tell it's there anymore, you can create the illusion of diversity. So chairs don't look like trees don't look like rocks don't look like light bulbs don't look like dogs. And you look around and you can't find oneness. Everything's coming from infinitely one source, but you never know it because the universe seems like it has trillions upon trillions of things in it. So therefore, you get the illusion of diversity even though everything's coming from infinite oneness. Now, if we were to put that dilemma into the alphabet, we would say, alphabetically speaking, the meaning of life is, I'm here to connect back to the Aleph, because the Aleph represents God's oneness, right? So I'm here to connect back to that Aleph of God's oneness. What does God say in response? I'm sorry, I can't let you do it. I can't let you connect directly back to me. I'm so infinitely perfect, infinitely pleasurable, you'd never be able to disconnect. You would just latch on, you'd be a robot or a zombie. I don't want a planet full of robots. You'd lose your free will. So God takes his oneness and hides it behind a spectrum of diversity where you can't find oneness. In other words, God takes his oneness and hides it behind a spectrum of diversity where you can't find oneness. So if you can't get your oneness directly from God because you can't handle it, where's the next place in the spectrum you can find one of anything? Right here, the number 10. And that answers the question we had before the break. Why did God take the letter of spirituality, view it, and assign it a value of 10? What's so spiritual about 10? The answer is 10 represents unity behind diversity. When you were a kid, it was one set, nothing left over. In other words, you can't get your oneness directly from God because you can't handle that. You can't disconnect from it, so God isn't going to do it. You lose your free will. But God takes his oneness and divides it into a spectrum to hide himself, and you're looking for the unity behind that spectrum of diversity. And that's why there's so many tens in Judaism, because 10 represents oneness as a unit behind diversity. For example, how many mitzvahs are there in the Torah? 600 and? Right. So why do they distill down to 10 commandments? The answer is because that's where the unity is, right? There's a unity in all 613. As a matter of fact, can you just add up the digits of 613 for me? Tell me what you got. Right, 10? Because that's where the unity is. So God's oneness comes down and divides into a spectrum of 10 to hide himself, to give you free will. Maybe exists, maybe doesn't. That's why if you look at the first 6 days of creation, don't be confused by the fact that it's 6 days. If you count up the statements of creation during those first 6 days, you'll see that the first 6 days contain 10 statements of creation. Each one made the mass thicker and thicker and thicker, till finally we had free will. Maybe God exists, maybe doesn't. So the 6 days, some of them have more than one statement of creation in them. Every let there be light, the waters be divided. Every let there be thickened the mass, so maybe God exists, maybe doesn't. That's why when the mass was thick enough to give you free will, later in history, Moses goes to Pharaoh and says, if you don't let the Jewish people go, the same God who hid himself behind 10 layers of a mask of nature to give you free will, maybe exists, maybe doesn't, he's going to peel those layers backwards until you're left with nothing, and then you're going to lose. And Pharaoh said, I don't think there's a God up there that knows how to do that. And Moses says, well, then you're going to lose. And that's what happens, because if you take the 10 statements of creation that God used during the first 6 days to hide himself to give you free will, and you line them up against the plagues in Egypt, where he took those layers and he peeled them backwards, you'll see that all 10s in Judaism always line up. In this case, it's reverse order, because the creation story thickened the mass and the plagues in Egypt thinned it. So the quickest example, the easiest one, is the second statement of creation is called let there be light, which corresponds to the 9th plague, which is the plague of darkness, right? So God's putting the layers in, and in Egypt, he's pulling layers out. Now, in Judaism, that means that all 10s will line up. 10 statements of creation, 10 commandments, 10 plagues in Egypt, because they're all God's oneness coming down and dividing into a spectrum of 10 to hide himself. So maybe exists, maybe doesn't, to give you free will. Now, what makes it difficult for a human being is when God created those 10 layers of a mask to hide himself, what he did is he took human senses, smell, touch, taste, sight, hearing, and designed them to be sensitive to and capable of tracking the bottom 7 of those 10 layers he hides behind. Meaning, the mask is 10 layers thick. Our senses are only sensitive to the bottom 7 of those 10. The upper 3 that God hides behind, the upper 3 layers, are so spiritual, we can't track them within nature. And that's why in a human brain, nature seems to be cycling in 7s, even though the full number of layers is 10. You don't see nature cycling in 10s. You only track nature cycling in the bottom 7. That's why in high school you took white light, divided it through a prism, and you saw 7 colors, right? Roy G. Biv. And in your Western tonal systems, you always go 7 notes and repeat, 7 notes and repeat, 7 notes and repeat. It's called an octave. And there's a logic to a 30-day month, because the moon goes from full to full every 29.53 days. And there's a logic to a 365-day year, because the Earth goes around the sun every 365 and a quarter days. But there's no logic to a 7-day week. 7 doesn't work. I don't know if you ever noticed this, but mathematically, you don't have to be a mathematical genius who lived thousands of years ago to know that 5-day weeks are perfect. You have perfect 6-week months. You have perfect 71-week years. So every civilization should be tracking a 5-day week. So how come we're not? The answer is because when God set civilizations into motion in the creation story, he set us cycling in a 7-day week, and we're all still tracking it. So that's the bottom 7 as opposed to the upper 3. And therefore, nature in our brain is a cycle of 7s instead of 10s. The upper 3 are all in the realm of thought. You want to know what they're called?
Or no, the one,
The upper three of the 10 layers that God hides behind are called the 10 Sphirot, 10 emanations. The upper three are in the realm of thought. The bottom 7 are in the realm of action. And you and I can only track the world of action. We can't track the world of thought. You know the guy Da Vinci drew in the circle? The bottom 7 would be what that guy does, because you can see, smell, touch, taste the world of action. The upper 3 would be what that guy thinks. You can't see, smell, touch, taste, or track his thoughts, but they do exist. You just can't track them within nature. So that's the difference between the upper 3 and the bottom 7. That's why, by the way, when we read the 10 plagues in Egypt, the first week we read 7 plagues, the next week we read 3, right? That's the bottom 7, upper 3, yeah.
Did Jews have a 7-day week before the Romans?
We started back from Adam with the 7-day week, and civilizations got it from us.
Well, I thought we didn't have a calendar until Pesach.
No, the Torah introduces a calendar, but it's numbers. It was during the Babylonian exile that we associated those numbers with names, Nisan, Iyar, Sivan. But the Torah discusses it as numbers.
What about, we have our own days?
Numbers.
Oh, no.
Yeah. Okay, so that now I want to do a quick tangent with you, and then we'll get back to the letter Aleph. I want to do this tangent because I've been teaching this class for so many years that everything we've done has been sort of Kabbalistic and mystical without a practical side to it. So I worry that you'll walk away from the class thinking, okay, we learned a lot about Jewish mysticism, but there's nothing we can really practically take away from the class. So here, hopefully, if you followed part 1 and part 2 that we've been doing this evening, certain things in the Torah that don't make sense will start making sense. For example, there's a very famous sentence in the Torah that we borrow from the Torah and we recite when we make Kiddush on Shabbat. And that sentence very famously is, in 6 days God created the heavens and the earth, and on the 7th day he rested. Now, when you were a little kid, let's say your folks sent you to Sunday school or some sort of Jewish educational whatever, and let's say we're in the 3rd grade and your Sunday school teacher said, hey kids, if God rests on the Sabbath, we should rest on the Sabbath. Think, okay, makes sense by me. I'll hang out on the couch, watch TV or something. But that was fine when you were a little kid. If you come back to that verse as an adult, and you think about that verse carefully, you'll see the verse makes no sense, right? In other words, what do you mean in 6 days God created the heavens and the earth, and the 7th day rested? I'm a human being. I work hard all week. I could use the weekend as a response to the stress of the week. And therefore, as a human being, there's something I can rest from because I need to respond to it. But God in his infinite perfection is not affectable. So if you're God, there's nothing to rest from because nothing can affect you. So God doesn't rest, people rest. That's problem number 1 with the verse. Problem number 2 of the verse is, if what we said this evening is correct, and we look at God metaphorically like a projector, and the spiritual realm in our universe with its billions of galaxies is a constant projection, then if the projector rests, no more projection. Which means on the 7th day, the sun would go down Friday night, God would start to rest, you light Shabbat candles, then you and the universe would disappear. You'd reappear Saturday night traumatized, go into therapy all week, trying to prepare for next Friday. It would be a disaster. So that's the second problem. The 2 problems with the verse is God doesn't rest, people rest, and if God does rest, poof, everything's gone. So what do we do with the verse? And the answer is the verse must be correct because it's in the Torah. The problem is not with the verse. The problem is we never left our 3rd grade understanding of the verse. But if you put tonight's class in the verse will make sense. So let's try with tonight's material, right? In 6 days, God created the heavens and the earth, and on the 7th day he rested. But based on tonight's class, what was he doing during those first 6 days? He was creating a mask of nature to hide himself. Why? To give you free will, maybe exists, maybe doesn't. So let's put that in the verse. In 6 days, God created a mask of nature. On the 7th day he rested. Good. But if the purpose of the mask of nature was to hide, so maybe he's in the room right now, maybe he's not, to give you free will, let's put that in the verse, right? So it says, in 6 days, God created a mask of nature to hide himself. On the 7th day, he's resting from hiding. That's what Shabbat is. God's resting from hiding on the 7th day to make it easier for you to attach yourself back to him. So if God has to thicken the mask to give you free will, what he's saying is in the last 24 hours of every week, he's going to rest from thickening the mask, which means from God's perspective, he's going to allow that mask to thin a little bit. Now, if you and I are down here on Shabbat acting like it's Tuesday, because we got to go to work and we got to go shopping, we got to do whatever. And in effect, we're thickening the mask and blocking our soul's ability to connect back to God. While he's up there for 24 hours allowing the mask to thin, he's like, what are you all doing? You're ruining the whole effect. I'm thinning the mask to make it easier for you to connect back to me on Shabbat than it is on a Tuesday. And you all are acting like it's Tuesday, so you're thickening the mask and ruining it. And that's why for the last 3,300 years, we Jews have refrained from mask thickening types of creative work, and we have not rested from work. I'll give you an example, right? Let's say a Jewish guy on Shabbat has a 300-pound sofa in his basement, and he decides by himself he's going to schlep it up 3 flights of stairs to see what it looks like on the 3rd floor of his house. It takes him 2.5 hours. So he gets it up to the 3rd floor, looks around and says, nah, that's a big mistake. It clashes with the carpet, doesn't really fit. Puts it back on his back, spends an hour and a half taking it back to the basement. After Shabbat ends, he's in the hospital for 6 weeks, in traction, with a chiropractor working on his back every day. Because you got to be an idiot to move a 300-pound sofa up and down 3 flights of stairs by yourself. So he did a ton of work, but he never violated Shabbat because that sofa was already there. He just moved it around. But if I take my finger and with 1/1000th of a calorie, I flick that light on, I didn't do any work whatsoever, but I just violated Shabbat because that light wasn't there. So therefore, it has nothing to do with how hard you're working. It has to do with, are you thickening the mask and blocking your soul's ability to connect back to God? Or for 24 hours, just like God is resting from thickening the mask, are you and I resting from thickening the mask? And that's the deeper idea of what it means to refrain from work on Shabbat. It's nothing to do with how hard you're working. It has to do with, are you thickening the mask or not? You follow? That's a little bit of a practical look at tonight's class. Is that helpful? Okay, good. Now, let's go back and finish up. We did, an Aleph is really an upper Yud, lower Yud, and slanted Vav, and now we know what the letters mean. So let's go back and analyze what God's hinting at when he creates such a complex form for the letter representing his oneness. So we said Yud is the letter of? Yud is the letter of? Spirituality, good. So upper Yud would represent what kind of spirituality? What would you say? Yeah, heaven, God sitting on his throne, and the let's make a deal metaphor was curtain number 3. The goal, godliness, spirituality, what you're here to connect to. So that would be upper Yud. Now, an Aleph has a lower level Yud. A lower level Yud implies there's spirituality down here in our world. Is there spirituality down here in our world? Say yes.
Yes.
Correct. Where is the Yud of the chair? Let's see if you were paying attention. Where's the Yud of the chair? Uh-oh. Right. It would be the beaming of the chair into existence. Remember with the spiritual glasses, you can see God is constantly willing the chair into existence. So that flow of spirituality causing the chair to exist would be its Yud. Right? The chair itself is not a Yud. The chair is physical, right? I didn't do it with you, but the letter of physicality in the Torah's metaphor, the letter of physicality, just make a little space here. The letter of physicality is actually the letter Daled. It's not tonight's class, but Daled is the 4th letter of the alphabet. Daled is the Torah's letter of physicality. So the atoms, molecules, electrons of the plastic would be Daled, but the spiritual flow causing it to exist would be its Yud. That was hard. I'll make it easier for you. Where would your Yud be? Your Yud would be your soul, right? Your soul would be Yud. The atoms, molecules, electrons of the cells of your body would be Daled. The clothing would be Daled. But your soul would be Yud. Fine. So therefore, let's go back to the Aleph. There's a lower level Yud. Let's call that your soul. That's lower level spirituality. There's an upper level Yud. That's godliness. That's heaven. That's what you're here to connect to. But what blocks you from making the connection is that Vav. It's the first 6 days of creation. It's the mask of nature that hides God. You got to eat. You got to sleep. You got to go to work. And therefore, that mask can be so thick that you could decide there is no upper level Yud, become an atheist and walk away. So that first 6 days of creation, that mask of nature that God hides behind, not only is creating free will, but it's also blocking your ability to connect back to him, and that free will allows you to make that decision. Now, the Christian approach to the mask of nature blocking you is fascinating. If Christianity allowed me to speak on their behalf, which they don't, and if they understood the Hebrew alphabet, which they don't, they would probably say something like, that mask of nature, that first 6 days of creation, is so inherently negative and so inherently blocking, you'll never get past it. So what high-level Christianity suggests, and I'm going to generalize here because from what I've read, there are over 2,000 sects of Christianity. I'm going to just use Catholicism. What they suggest is to get rid of the blockage of the mask of nature with all its corruptions is you try to squeeze that mask down as small as possible to make it easier to get past. For example, if you're a man, don't marry a woman. Sexuality is way too distracting. Marry God. Go to a monastery, wear a simple brown robe, forget about fancy outfits, sleep on a simple bed, eat simple meals, meditate and pray all day, and take that mask of nature with its Rolex watches and BMWs and fancy vacations, squeeze it down real small, and it makes it easier to get past. Same for women. Don't marry a man. Sexuality is way too distracting. Marry God. Go to a convent, wear a simple black robe, sleep on a simple bed, do acts of kindness, meditate, pray all day. Take that mask of nature with its fancy shopping, fancy jewelry, fancy whatever, squeeze it down real small. It's much easier to get past. And you know what Judaism says about their approach? They're right. You don't have to be a Torah genius to realize that if all you do all day is meditate and pray and try to connect to God, of course you're going to be more spiritual. You stay away from shopping centers, for sure you're going to be more spiritual, right? I mean, you don't have to be a Torah genius to figure that out. But we say they're making a big mistake. We say they're right, but they're making a big mistake. Because they're taking that mask of nature with its fancy houses, fancy vacations, fancy whatever, and they're saying it's so inherently negative, so inherently corrupting, you'll never get past it. And we say, 1 second, that's not fair. God made that mask. It's not negative. It's just a mask. If you have enough Torah perspective to understand the mask of nature which hides God, you don't have to be scared of it. For example, let's take a car, right? In a monastery, you don't need a car. But let's say I paid $25,000 for a Toyota. So a Toyota is part of the mask of nature which hides God. Why do I have to be scared of a Toyota? The answer is I don't. Because a Toyota is a great thing, right? I can take food to the poor. I can visit the sick. I can take my kids to school. I can get to work. So a Toyota may be a part of the mask of nature which hides God, but it's not negative. It's just a part of the mask of nature. But what if instead of paying $25,000 for a Toyota, you pay $150,000 for a BMW? So now you have to answer a question honestly. What did you get for the extra $125,000 when you bought the BMW instead of Toyota? So you say, okay, Rabbi Marcus, that's easy. I can get more food to the poor in the trunk of the BMW than I can in the Toyota. And the answer is, gang, I checked. It's not true. They have the same size food. So you say, hey, I can visit the sick faster in a BMW than I can in a Toyota. And the answer is no, you can't, because the speed limit is the same for both cars. So what did you get for your extra $125,000? And the answer, if you're honest, is ego, because you tried to buy your self-image and your self-esteem on a car dealer parking lot. And it doesn't work. The advertisers promise you it's going to work, but they're paid to say that it's not true. You ever notice that really nasty people who drive really nice cars stay nasty? The answer is because a car can't help your self-esteem and self-image, even though you think it can. And now you've been damaged to the tune of $125,000 because you didn't know what a car was for. We have enough Torah perspective to know what a car is for, right? Visiting the sick, taking food to the poor, taking your kids to school. And that's why the mask of nature doesn't scare us. As a matter of fact, that vav, that first 6 days of creation, if you go into a hardware store in Israel and you buy a vav literally in Hebrew is a hook. It's exactly what God wants you to do, is to hook yourself to him. And therefore God says, take the mask of nature and use it to make the world a better place. Take a nice car and use it to take your kids to school. Take a nice house and use it to have guests on Shabbat. Take a vacation and use it to be a more patient parent or more patient spouse. God says the exact same mask I hide behind is the exact method I want you to use to hook yourself to me. And that's why Jews do not go to monasteries. And that's the meaning of life in the letter Aleph. Your soul here connect to God. When used improperly, the mask will block you but give you free will. When used properly, that same mask will hook you to God. And that's the meaning of life in the shape of the letter. Any questions on that? We good?
What did you say about the Dalet earlier?
I'll get to that in a second. Let's just do a little bit of math so you can see the Torah work mathematically. Other texts do not work mathematically. But if you take the famous name of God in the Torah, which is spelled with a yud, a hey, a vav, and a hey, we do not pronounce this name as spelled. You have to mentally take the dashes out of the board because you can't erase that name. So I'm pretending to write it as 4 separate letters. But if you see that name in the Torah, we scan that name with our eyes, but we say a lower level, less powerful name instead to hide that higher level, more powerful name. So when we look at the Yud and Hey, Vav and Hey name of God, we're saying a lower level name of God instead to hide that higher. You know what I'm talking about? Like in the Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad, right? It's in there twice. Okay, fine. So if you take the mathematical value of those 4 letters, this is very famous. Yud is the 10th letter of the Hebrew alphabet. Hey is the 5th. Vav is the 6th. Hey is the 5th. So if you add up those 4 letters, in Jewish mysticism, you get 26. 26 represents the infinite oneness, infinite perfection of God. beyond time, matter, space, energy, beyond the universe, beyond reality, and it's a name we do not pronounce. Aleph, I told you, is the only silent letter of the Hebrew alphabet. We don't pronounce it. If you add up the letters, upper yud is 10, lower yud is 10, slant above is 6. You add it up, you get 26. So the letter Aleph itself is the same mathematical value as the infinite oneness and perfection name of God. Now, there's something called the paradox of free will. It's circular, so listen carefully. The paradox of free will is that when God hides himself behind the mask of nature, he does that to give you free will, but it forces him to keep that oneness hidden. Because if he brings a flow of oneness out of hiding and interacts with you, he's so infinitely perfect, infinitely pleasurable, he will destroy your free will. You'll just grab on robotically and latch on. He'll ruin his relationship with you. So he's forced to keep that oneness hidden because you can't handle it. But if you use your free will properly and you say, listen, God, I know you're there. The mask of nature doesn't fool me. Your proper use of free will allow God out of hiding. In other words, the more you know he's there through proper free will, the more oneness will come flowing out of hiding to interact with you because you can handle it because you're using your free will correctly. It's when you're not sure God's there, you force him to keep that oneness hidden. The more sure you are he's there, the more oneness flows out and interacts with you because he won't destroy your free will because you're using it correctly. It's when you're not using it correctly, you force him to stay hidden. Did that make sense?
So when you're
Okay.
trying to get closer to him, he reinforces it.
The more you turn to him, the more his oneness comes out of hiding. The less you're sure he's there, the more you force him to stay hidden because he doesn't want to destroy your free will. So once you got that, you got the word Aleph, because the letter Aleph is spelled Aleph Lamed Fe. Aleph, that's how you spell the letter. But if you add up the value of Aleph, Aleph is the first letter of the Hebrew alphabet. Lamed, down here is a value of 30. Fe has a value of 80. So if you add up Aleph plus Lamed plus Fe, you have to add 1 plus 30 plus 80. You see, Aleph is all oneness. It's about taking God's oneness and creating a flow of oneness out into the world. Follow? Now, remember I told you we have the only text in history where every word is the sum total of the meanings of his letters. But now we have enough letters to see some simple words in Hebrew. So you see why God spells them the way he does. This is the word yad. What is the yad in Hebrew? Hand. So if God doesn't make spelling mistakes, he's telling you that the real purpose of remember, your head represents your thoughts, your arms represent your actions, right? So the purpose of a yad is to take the spiritual and bring it out into the physical. When you're taking spiritual ideas down into the physical world, you're using a yad correctly, right? The end goal of history for the Jewish people is to be able to take everything in the physical world and use it to connect it back to spirituality, right? That's the word die. As in the Pesach table, die means what? Enough. It's the end goal. It's the stopping point. When you take the physical and connect it back to the spiritual, that's the end goal of history, where everything is serving a spiritual purpose. You see how the letters are working here? Okay, just for fun, what's the mathematical value of the word yod? Yud is 10, dalet is 14, right? Have you ever noticed the only way to manipulate your hand is through 14 bones? You got 3, 6, 9, 12, but only 2 here, that's 14. So yod is a manipulation of 14 bones. The Torah itself is working mathematically, and every letter is a spiritual idea. So Aleph is oneness, Beit is two-ness, Gimel is three-ness. God's taking that, clicking together to create reality, and we have the only text in history that's working on this level because we believe we have the only God-given system of a language. And that's a sample of the Hebrew letter Aleph, and maybe on another visit we'll do other letters of the Hebrew alphabet. Okay, we'll stop there. Questions? Yeah.
Earlier you said that God hides behind the mask, and as Jews we don't go to a monastery
Because they're withdrawing from the mask, and they don't realize, because the mask they hold is corrupting, and therefore it blocks you from spirituality. We hold that if you have enough Torah perspective, that mask is the method that God wants you to use to hook yourself to him.
Okay. I hate to even interrupt this. I would just say today was a very powerful day for the Jews of Chicago. There's an incredible man who unfortunately died, and his wife live a long life. The Walder family. Anyone who's been in Chicago, the Walder family is synonymous with incredible character and incredible philanthropy. they have given so much money to so many organizations that you literally, if you would see Chicago pre-Walder and post-Walder, it's almost like antediluvian and post-Diluvian. It's like before the flood. And not only did they give money to organizations, they made organizations to make teachers better, which you can ask Marcy about, because she teaches science in Jewish schools, which has never been a strong suit. But they said there's a need, so they created an entire educational institute. They have something called a Kehillah Fund. I'm going to bring this back to Rabbi Marcus Koska. I just want to give you another example. It's like very raw today. A Kehillah Fund, which there's 11 different day schools. And the funny part of it is one of the rabbis got up there, he said they were the geniuses of Jewish unity, that everyone contributes to one pot and it's distributed according to the population in each schools. That you have Jews giving to schools they would never send their schools to. They would never send their own children to. But when we all together, we all have more together. It was like they were geniuses of using money. Rabbi, which way did you do the vote? You did it this way? That physical barrier, money, it's all, and hook it. They used money to bring godliness to the world. And anyone who's ever met them knows that's so, so, so true. I don't know how many hundreds of people were there at 8 a.m. this morning. They rented like the big wedding hall where, Rachel got married. Why? Because there was no synagogue that could fit the amount of people at 8 a.m. They bussed school children in because they were masters of not denying the vav of the natural world, of saying money is only about me, of using that money for godly purposes. And it's just another example of we don't shy away from the physical world. We use the physical world to bring godliness down and to hook to Hashem. So it was so much in my mind, Rabbi Marcus. Thank you, just to be able to connect it what's happened in Chicago. And on behalf of Project 613, I want to thank the Walders. Every year they are incredibly generous to Project 613. They're very generous, and I'm very grateful for that. And so a lot of what we're able to do here for many, many years is to the Walders. So please put your hands together for Rabbi Marcus. Thank you very much.